Hi guys, welcome back. This week I'm going to be doing a medieval figure for you because I realized, my gosh, it's been a really long time since I painted one of those, and probably that's because I have actually quite a big collection of them, but I tend to feel they're kind of samey. You know, you've done one or two of them and you've kind of covered all of them. There's not really big differences in terms of, you know, techniques that you have to apply when doing medieval era soldiers. Nonetheless, I was able to kind of get something a little bit different recently, so I thought that might be fun to share with you. And it's this guy. This is a sort of a medieval Islamic warrior from sort of the Crusades era. This comes from Gripping Beast and is sort of part of their new Crescent and Cross expansion for Saga. And I haven't done very many Gripping Beast figures, even though I think they're all really nice. It's just, you know, like I said, a lot of them feel similar, and I don't like being redundant. But this guy is really quite different, and he's got quite a different kind of sort of costume on than sort of your average sort of just medieval knight. And the other nice thing about these guys is they wore really bright colors a lot of the time, like oranges, yellows, reds. So I thought this might be a good opportunity to cover some of those other bright colors for you, because I recently got to pick up the Citadel oranges and yellows, and I've been kind of looking forward to trying them out, because as you've probably heard me say before, I love the Citadel reds. They're some of the best out there, and I want to see if the yellows and oranges are equally good, and, you know, if so, then they'll be great, because I can recommend them in the future and use them on projects that needs orange and yellow. So this should be a fun project for people who want to see some, you know, some oranges and yellows, some bright colors, and also embroidery and sort of fabric work, because that was the other thing. These clothing sort of from that, you know, that those peoples at that period was often very bright, heavily decorated. So it's kind of a fun painting challenge too, because you can probably see the figure itself is otherwise pretty simple. So you need to kind of find some ways to liven it up a little bit. So just before I get started, I wanted to point out real quick this as well. This is Medieval Warfare magazine. In case you don't know, it's one of the other magazines we produce along with War Games, Soldiers, and Strategy, and it's about medieval history and warfare specifically, and I thought it was nice to mention it right now because we literally just released an issue here which is about Richard the Lionheart on Crusade. So it's actually very, very relevant to this particular figure that I'm going to be doing this week for you. So, you know, if you have a little bit more interest in the period, in the history, and, you know, that kind of thing, you might want to check this out. It's got some really nice pictures in it, of course. If you haven't seen these magazines we do, they're all really beautifully illustrated. We produce a lot of custom paintings and stuff just for each issue. So even if you're not into reading, at least there's a lot of nice art in there that could be, you know, inspiration if you're a painter. And I will link to this where you can find this particular issue and also just more general information about Medieval Warfare magazine below in the description box if you're interested. So, alright, that should be about it. So why don't we go ahead and get started. So these warriors that were in Saladin's army came from a lot of different countries and sort of places in that sort of general Middle Near East region, and they came from a lot of social classes. You had richer ones, you had poorer ones. It was a big mix, really, though the general style of clothing looked very similar for everybody. I think the main difference was that more high-status individuals wore brighter colors, more expensive fabrics, and I've elected to do this guy in a more sort of high-status style just because that's more fun for me to paint. I think it's more interesting. I can show you more techniques and colors, so that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to start out here by giving him a nice kind of brilliant blue jacket, and I am applying here a base coat of Vallejo dark Prussian blue all over the outer coat area. So, kind of as always, when you're going to be painting a big fabric surface like that, this like a cloak or a cape where there's a lot of fabric and there's not a lot of really deep, hard creases, you're going to need to do a lot of blending to get to look good, and it'll be easiest for you, therefore, if you make lots of gradual color steps, mix more different layers than you might otherwise. If you make more extreme steps, you're going to have to spend more time blending. It's going to be harder. If you make more gradual, subtle steps, you'll have to mix more colors, but in the end I think it's a little bit faster. So my first layer I'm applying here is just taking that dark Prussian blue and mixing in a little bit of medium blue, and you can see that I'm starting to just sort of gradually build that on top of the areas that I want to start lightening up, and I'm blending it out into the dark Prussian blue base. And then I'm going to just continue, and now I'm just using the pure medium blue. And as always, when you're doing this blending, make sure your colors are relatively thin and transparent so that you can, apply them easily and smooth them over, and, have the transitions, be nice and even. And of course, as always, you can apply multiple layers, as I am doing here, to build up the color and get it stronger where you need it. I also wanted to point out here that I am adding a little bit of Vallejo blue-green into my colors, and that's mostly just to give the blue a slightly more interesting, rich, vivid cast. It's a little bit different from what I usually do. So this is, like I said, this is mostly just medium blue, but it does have some of that blue-green in it. And again, I'm just go over, apply more layers, start building up the areas where there's going to be more light and where there's some definite, creasing, and, keep layering and layering until you've gotten that color about as saturated as it possibly can be. And then you kind of move on to the next highlight level. And what I've done here now is I've taken that blue-green and I mixed really quite a lot of it into the medium blue. Before I'd just been kind of putting in a little bit just to give it a slight tint, but now I've put really a lot in. So you can see it's really noticeably brightened and lightened the blue and given it a really distinctly different cast. And as usual, as in the last step, I'm keeping it thin, and I'm just going to keep layering it on over and over and building it up gradually over the areas that I want lighter and higher, and just continuously applying layers. And if you're curious about what areas to emphasize, if you're kind of thinking about like where light's going to hit, I should say, always you're going to want to always think about the tops of shoulders, most of the back of the jacket where there's not any kind of creases, anywhere like that, and areas. Sometimes then what you really need to think about is actually just the areas you want to avoid. So like the areas under his shield, under his arm, stuff like that. So you want to not be building up very much color there, and then just kind of everywhere else. It depends. Sometimes it's easier to think of it in an additive way, and sometimes it's easier to think of it in a subtractive way. My final highlight color is going to be Vallejo Deep Sky Blue now. I have mixed a little medium blue in, and of course that teal blue again, so that we can keep the sort of the color quality similar. And again, just layering that on, building it up, just gradually lightening it, depending on how gradual you want to be. Here you can make a couple layers where you add in, more sky blue, deep sky blue to the mix, just so it can go more slowly and easily. A tip here that's kind of helpful, especially when you're kind of getting down to the very end with highlighting and sort of shading something like this, you may find that some of the wrinkles and deep creases on the jacket may look too extreme relative to the highest colors. If that happens, one thing you can do is take that really high color and thin it down so it's quite transparent, and then lightly sort of and evenly apply a layer over your darkest shadow areas. And that won't, there's still going to be dark shadow areas, but it's going to help a little bit in kind of unifying them with your highest highlights, making the transitions a little bit less sharp and extreme, and just kind of create more of a, just more of a gentler transition. You need, if you're going to do that, don't overdo it. Don't go overboard, and then you need to really use a thin color in that case. But it is a way sometimes to, just fix areas where the color contrast is a little more than you really want. Now at this point, depending on what you're looking for, your skill level, what difficulty level you want in your figure, how much time you want to invest, you can kind of just stop here, and you've got a nice pretty blended kind of blue jacket. But like I said, because I'm going for a high status individual here and I want to make this interesting, I'm going to be painting a pattern on the jacket. The color I'm using for this is Vallejo Sky Gray. And what it's going to be here is kind of a diamond pattern with some sort of designs in the middle of all the diamonds. And for this, I'm going to be using a number 0 brush, just because it's a little bit easier to control for this fine line work. I thought I'd point that out, since I often use number 1. And I'm going to start out by here making all of the lines going in one direction. And the main thing to pay attention here is that you keep your lines even and smooth as best you can, and the spacing, you try to get the spacing as even as you possibly can. Just kind of start at one side and go around the jacket. You're probably going to get at some point where you're going to end up with lines that then don't quite match up or not even. The best thing to do is to try to aim for that point happening somewhere that's not very noticeable, like under the shield or, you know, that kind of thing. And then once I've gone one direction with the lines, I'm going to go back and start going the other direction with the lines, and the same applies here. Just take your time, be careful in drawing your line, try to get them even, and, you know, make sure that the spacing between the lines is uniform, because you don't want some diamonds to look much larger or skinnier than other diamonds in your pattern. When the diamonds are done, I'm going to make sort of the indication that there's some like flowers or kind of, I don't know, patterns in the center of the diamonds. And to do this, all I'm really doing is I'm kind of just making a series of little kind of grouped, loosely grouped dots in the center of every one of my diamonds. It's not precise. At this scale, you can't make a really specific looking image, really. Well, I mean, you can, but it's an awful lot of work. But you can get just as good of results here, really, by just trying to make sort of indicate that there's some sort of flowery thing going on here. And so just kind of, you know, kind of rough that in here. This should actually go pretty quickly because it's not nearly as precise as or as critical that you're even here as it is when you're doing the diamonds. And as always, you want to make sure while you're working on this that you keep your paint nice and thin at all times, because it'll just be easier, it'll flow better, and if your paint gets thick, it'll just be really hard to do this detailed line work. When you're finished painting your pattern, also don't forget to base coat the trim, sort of the border on his jacket in that same sky gray color, because we want it to kind of match the pattern. And then when you're done with that, we can start highlighting. For that, I'm just using white, which again, you need to get it nice and thin so it flows easily. And the way we're going to be using white is we're not going to be applying it everywhere, okay, on our pattern. We're going to be going back over selected parts of the pattern with it and highlighting. And the way that you figure out where you need to be putting the white is you kind of look at the blue underneath and you look at the areas where you have the lightest, kind of brightest blues occurring. And wherever that is, you want to go back over those areas of the pattern with pure white, which is what I'm doing. So that includes both the lines, which I'm going to do first, and then sort of the designs inside. So, you know, look for any areas where you've got the lighter, brighter blue and go ahead and work over those again with white. And you may even want to go and do a couple passes depending on how transparent your white is. So you can even get some areas that are sort of highlighted white a little bit, and then some areas that are really brightly white where you've really got, you know, the sort of the highest colors. And this is really neat because it'll make the jacket look, you'll really see a highlighted effect happening when you do this, and it'll also make it look a little bit shiny too, like the jacket has areas that's kind of catching the light, which is ideal for this because the kinds of fabrics that these guys were wearing were kind of silks or brocades, which are kind of shiny, satiny fabrics. So it's a very, very suitable effect on this type of figure. And areas, you'll see like areas that are under his arm, behind his shield, areas that are kind of in the shadows, I'm not going to highlight at all, so I'm not going to be putting any white over those areas, and then you see a really kind of clear contrast then between the areas that I have gone over with white and the areas that, you know, just are, you know, really meant to be in, you know, to be darker. And once you finish highlighting the pattern, then you want to also take your white and go ahead and highlight the trim of his jacket, and that's really just a question of layering it on in a couple layers. So I'm, because white takes a while to build up. So I'm going to apply maybe one layer pretty much everywhere, and then I'm going to keep going back in and gradually adding layers in areas where light would be hitting again to get those areas brighter and brighter white. So there's going to be kind of some very sort of subtle differences in color and some slightly brighter areas and some slightly more shaded areas. But because it is white, the difference between the kind of shaded areas and the high highlight areas is going to be pretty subtle, and that's what you want with very light colors like that. Now I'm going to be moving on to some of the bright colors that I promised you in this. And he's got sort of an under tunic on, and I decided that I would paint that an orange color. And as always, like when I'm painting a red too, you want to base coat these colors with a very particularly dark color, maybe darker than you might otherwise go for, because it'll add good contrast as you work. So I'm using Vallejo beige brown here, and I'm going to paint just that under tunic wherever it shows in that color. And now I'm going to start applying the brighter orange. And as I said, I'm going to be trying out some Citadel oranges and yellows in this figure. So what I've got here is Jocara orange, which is the Citadel orange base color. And I'm just going to start layering that over the orange areas. And because it's a base color, it has pretty good coverage, so you won't need to apply too many layers of it. You can put it on nice and thick and heavy. And and since the orange on this figure is relatively sparing, you're not going to probably have to spend too much time blending. You can just kind of focus it on the tops of what few creases and folds there are, and just leave that beige brown a little bit more down in the recesses. After that, I am going to take the Citadel Fire Dragon orange, which is another layer color, and start working that over top. Now, the Fire Dragon orange, it's a layer color, so it's a lot more transparent. And like many sort of brights, very bright brights like this, it's transparent sometimes in a little bit of a difficult way. And that's what I found was the case with this too. It's not, I didn't think that the bright orange layer color was quite as nice as the bright red layer color from Citadel, so that was a little disappointing. It was still good, but it was a little bit more tricky to use because the pigmentation was a little bit uneven. So you wouldn't get a smooth layer when you put it down. Some areas would be kind of more pigmented than others. So in order for this to come out well, you need to spend some time applying very thin, even layers, and then just keep adding those layers and building it up until you get a nice, smooth, bright color that's as light as you need it to be, I guess. But you have to be patient and just really worry more about the color, your coats being even, than about them necessarily being as saturated as you want. And if you want to highlight orange like this further, a good tip is you can take a yellow color and you can apply that as a high highlight, kind of blend it out a little bit. And that can give it too much of a yellow cast. And if that happens, then you can just go back over the yellow like I did here again with that orange color. And because these colors are so transparent, that yellow underneath will brighten and lighten the orange that you put on top of it. So it's, it's just a way to get sort of a lighter orange effect. You can also just mix the yellow and the orange too, by the way, and that's another way, which I did something like that later on, which is another way you can make a high highlight color for your bright oranges. I decided I wanted to get another very sort of simple design on the orange. So what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be making bands around his sleeves and around the bottom of his tunic using a mixture of sky gray and a little bit of that Fire Dragon orange again. And then I'm also going to just take my brush, my number 0 again, and really finally just make some sort of fribbles and frobbles and little lines and dots. Just, they're not anything specific, but just kind of lightly kind of put those in, and it'll sort of be the indication that there's like some embroidery work or some kind of like fine design above the line. I'm then going to highlight those areas once I've applied them using a mixture of white and again the Fire Dragon orange, and then I'm just going to focus it on the areas that are where light is hitting and not put it down in the folds. Obviously, it's pretty self-explanatory. And you can then even go back again with a third highlight if you want of just pure white and use that to really brighten the highest areas where light is really hitting the figure. Since we're having so much fun with the brights, I thought, why not, let's do some yellows too. So I'm going to be painting his breeches and his headscarf using yellow. Again, I want a very nice dark color as my base that I'm going to build my bright colors on top of. So for that, I'm going to be using a Vallejo Middlestone, and I'm just applying that on all the areas that I plan to have yellow later. Then I'm going to start layering on the Citadel yellow base color, which is Averland Sunset. You can see it's going to go most of the areas. I'm just going to apply it, kind of try to get it on pretty smoothly and kind of blend it out a little bit so the areas that are down in the folds and the creases remain a little bit, you know, darker. But as always with these base colors, it coats pretty well. So you won't have to go back in too many times, but you may want to add an extra layer to some areas that you want to make particularly bright. So, just try to get this even, kind of, smooth it on, and, just apply extra to areas that you know are going to be getting more light. I'm then going to be highlighting the yellow using the Citadel yellow layer color Flash Gets Yellow. I found this a little bit easier to work with than the orange layer color. I don't know, it was a little bit more saturated. The color kind of it was just a little bit more even. It went on more evenly, a little more smoothly. It was a little bit more pigmented, so I found it easier to work with. And but it's still definitely thinner than the base color, so I'm going to just be layering it on all of the areas that are the tops of folds and creases and where light is hitting, and just sort of smoothing and blending it out down into the folds. And in this case, you will probably want to apply it sort of higher and brighter in some areas, so you will need to go back in and, like on it, especially on his headscarf, and probably apply a couple of layers, especially towards the top, just to get it as bright and light as you want. And it is, because of layer color, it is still a little bit uneven, so you're also going to have to be careful that you don't get some areas of uneven pigmentation, so you want to make sure you clean that up. I decided I need a little bit more contrast and even higher highlight on the yellow when I was done. I often find that's the case with yellow, but creating a high highlight for yellow is quite simple. You just mix some white into it, and that's what I've done here. I've just added a bit of white to the Flash Gets Yellow to lighten it further, and I'm going to start applying it, layering it again onto the tops of creases fairly transparently, and building it up as needed. Then another neat thing about applying this sort of whitish yellow to things is it's a great way to give the fabric a sort of a shiny, kind of glossy or silky effect, which is, as we said on this guy, kind of nice because he's wearing a lot of those kinds of brocades and kind of shiny, bright fabrics, presumably. So, it works well. Now I'm going to go ahead and work on some leather and wood areas on this figure, places I want to be dark. So that includes his boots. He's got also kind of a little belt or sort of trim there around his waist that I want to do in this color. And also the inside of his shield, I'm going to be painting dark brown as sort of a base. And here, for this, I'm going to start out using Vallejo German Camouflage Black Brown, which is, my good old standby dark brown base color. I'm then going to start highlighting all of the brown areas. I am going to start out by using some Foundry Bay Brown medium as a sort of overall highlight on the boots and the belt. I'm applying it fairly thinly and blending it out, but I'm putting it pretty much everywhere. It's really kind of just my kind of overall highlight color on these places. For the inside of the shield, most of it's obscured. You're not going to see it, so it doesn't really need very much highlight. You don't really need to do a lot with it. But I do want to apply a little bit just to areas where it's a little bit more exposed. So I'm taking here Bay Brown Shade from Foundry, and I'm painting it onto the surfaces where it's a little bit more exposed, and then sort of blending it and thinning it back into the more shadowed areas. And then I'm going to take the Bay Brown medium color that I just used on the boots and apply it as well, doing the same thing, applying it around the edges and the lighter areas, and then blending it out into the darker Bay Brown Shade regions. And that's all I'm really going to do with the shield. And then I'm going to continue highlighting the boots. I'm using Chestnut Shade here from Foundry, and in this case I'm going to be applying it fairly thinly because I don't want my boots to get too red or too light, so I'm going to apply it quite sparingly and then blend it out pretty heavily, so the sort of the most color is going to end up on areas where there's wear, like his toes and heels and sort of the tops of creases and folds, because those are areas where light would be hitting. And then I'm going to continue with Chestnut Medium, doing exactly the same thing on the leather areas, but then even less, even more subtly, just a very small amount, and really thinning it out so that it doesn't come across too strong, and just, you know, really just using it as sort of an emphasis on those lighter or more worn areas of the leather. Now I'm going to work on the iron and steel areas of this figure. You're going to have to be a little bit careful here because we did things in a little bit of a strange order. So you've got some metal areas inside, and you don't want to get your metallic paint onto the fabric we've already finished. But I'm taking a mixture here of Vallejo German Gray and Vallejo Air Gunmetal with a lot more of the German Gray in there, obviously, so it's nice and dark. And I'm going to be painting the chainmail with that, his sword blade, and also the sort of spike on the very top of his helmet, and those are just going to get a good base coat. I'm then going to highlight a bit. My first highlight is going to be just mixing a bit more of the gunmetal into the color. I already had to lighten it up, and I'm going to kind of lightly go over everything with that, the chainmail especially lightly with those colors. Next, I'm going to take just pure gunmetal, and I'm going to kind of overbrush the chainmail with it in the areas where I expect light would be hitting, especially as my focus. And, you know, as usual, overbrushing means get most of the paint off your brush so it's just not too loaded, and then very lightly go over the surface so the paint doesn't get down in the cracks. And that's a sufficient for me when it comes to highlighting the chainmail, though I am going to shade it a little further by taking some Nuln Oil wash and very carefully, you know, pin washing down in the recesses or any creases in the chainmail or areas where there would be a lot of shadow, like under his hat or under his sleeves or whatever. There you want to apply that black wash more heavily. The blade also needs to be highlighted again with just pure gunmetal. You want to be building that up. Same with the spike on his helmet, because those areas need to be brighter and shinier. And they are also both going to get an additional highlight beyond the chainmail. I'm going to take some pure Vallejo Air steel at that point, and I'm going to start building it up on them to get them really nice and shiny. As always, you want to probably not put the steel everywhere. You want to apply it kind of thinly and layered a little bit. And with the sword especially, you want to kind of focus that extra shiny metal color along the cutting edge of the blade, so you kind of get an effect where it's extra shiny on one side and it kind of blends out to a slightly darker color at the back side, and that kind of simulates the fact that cutting edges are often more polished on, you know, these types of weapons, and, you know, it'll just, you know, that'll just work really nicely for you. For the gold and bronze areas, which include the sort of the pommel and guard of his sword, the sort of scale mail on his front of his chest, and the rest of his helmet, I'm going to be taking a mix of German camouflage black-brown and a little bit of Vallejo Air gold and applying a nice heavy base coat onto those areas. Again, being careful not to get it onto the fabric work that's already been done. And then I'll just take the pure Vallejo Air Gold and use it to highlight all of those areas lightly, just kind of layering it on a little bit. Obviously, the helmet is really going to get a lot of light, so you're going to want to make sure you highlight it extra. And, you know, this guy's a little bit blingy, I feel like, so after I finished with just the regular gold, I went in and added another highlight layer. I took and mixed some of the Vallejo Air Steel into my gold, and then very lightly used that to make an extra highlight, especially sort of along the tops of his scales, just a little on the edge of his sword, and pretty heavily on the top of his helmet, because just there's a lot of light hitting, and I figured it would be really polished and brilliant up there, and I really wanted to emphasize it. But again, use this color sparingly, don't overdo it, because it'll spoil the effect. The final thing I did in terms of getting the gold and brass ready was I applied a wash of Agrick's Earthshade to his scale mail on his chest, just because I thought we need a little bit more definition down between the scales, and I wanted them to be a little darker because they are pretty well in shadow there. So you just want to take a pin wash of the Agrick's Earthshade and just kind of work it down in between those pieces. The final thing we need to do is paint the outside of the shield. I looked a little bit at shield designs that were common, and luckily it seems like just very simple geometric patterns were used quite often, so you don't have to, you know, be a really brilliant detail painter to get a nice result here. And I decided to kind of keep with the other colors and go with a sort of an orange white design. So I'm base coating everything here with beige brown. And then I'm going to start highlighting the shield with the Jokeiro orange. You can see what I'm doing here, sort of applying it towards the top of the shield and then dragging it down and blending it out so it's brighter towards the top and darker towards the bottom. And I'm going to apply also a heavier layer around the edge because more light's going to be hitting there, and apply additional layers more at the top so, you know, it's always heavier and brighter up there and always gets slightly darker, so there's a slight gradient as you move downwards. And I'll continue that now with the Fire Dragon orange, applying it in layers, just, you know, putting it towards the top and dragging it downwards, and then continuing to build up layers of it, and it'll take several to get it bright enough with this color. And again, the most important thing is that your layers are even and smooth, and, you know, just take your time, make sure your paint gets to dry a lot. I often, when I have to do a big smooth area like this, and I have to put on a lot of even layers, if I'm impatient and I don't want to wait for them to dry in between, I'll run them under a hair dryer real quick, you know, just so I can work faster, which is what I did here. So several layers, and just keep building it up and blending it downward so you end up with brighter colors toward the top and darker to the bottom. And I made a final highlight on the shield by mixing a little of that Flesh Gets Yellow into my Fire Dragon orange, and I'm kind of lightly now applying that to the very top of the shield and blending it down, and that's just going to be my very brightest and lightest highlight for the very top. And one of the sort of patterns that I saw in shields for these types of units, which I thought was nice and simple but still very graphic, was just these sort of diagonal stripes running across. And I'm going to be doing these in white because, you know, it just fits with the color palette we've already used here, and, you know, sort of echoes what we've got in his under tunic. So I'm just applying stripes of the sky gray here now over my orange, and the main thing here is to try to get even lines that are evenly spaced, that, you know, as best you can. You can go back in with a little orange if you need to, you know, smooth things out, and you'll probably need to apply several layers of the sky gray just to get it, you know, good coverage here. And then I'm going to start highlighting the white, or the white stripes using white. And I'm just applying the white now over the sky gray. And you're going to want to get a little bit of shading effect here. So the stripes towards the bottom of the shield, I'm going to apply less white to, and so it's more close to the sky gray. And I'm going to blend it out more and not apply so many layers. Whereas the stripes more towards the top of the shield, I'm going to apply more white, more layers of white, build it up more there so it's brighter and lighter, you know, and just, you know, just keep layering it on, and you're just more intensely there. And you also want to make sure those, where the white goes on to hits the very edge of the shield, you're going to want to also add more layers of white because there's more light hitting there, and you want that to also feel brighter. But just keep layering your white on until you build it up enough over, especially the, you know, just the areas towards the top. Okay, and here is our sort of finished Islamic warrior that you would find kind of in a Crusade-era army, somebody like under Saladin or something. And as we said at the beginning, this is a high-status individual wearing bright colors and expensive clothes. Of course, you can make much more you know, simplistic versions of this figure using darker, more plain colors, you know, and then you'll be you'll get under with a much less complex paint job that'll take you a lot less time. But I wanted to really try to get the most out of this figure because I wanted to show you all the techniques I could, you know, just give you some ideas about things like painting patterns, painting bright colors, what you can do if you really want to, you know, really go for broke on this type of unit. And you really don't have to do it. It's all optional. I mean, like I said, you could easily just paint the coat blue and not put the pattern on, or just paint the pattern on the under tunic, or, you know, make sort of mix and match, come up with a combination, just make adjustments accordingly to get, you know, a difficulty level that you're comfortable with. But, you know, I think it's useful to see what is possible if you want to go to the trouble. And I also hope this gave you some sense about the bright colors, how you can work with them. As I guess I said at the beginning, I was not sure what I would think of the Citadel brights besides the red, the orange, and the yellow. And overall, I was pleased with how they came out. I wasn't overwhelmed, though, as I was with the red. The red, I just love to death how it works, but I don't think I liked the result I got in the orange and yellow cards. Well, it was acceptable, it was nice, but it wasn't quite as wonderful. It wasn't quite as amazing as the red. So, you know, I think I'll keep using them if I need to make orange or yellow things, because I still think they were better than most other orange or yellow paints I've run into, but they were not so amazing that there isn't room for improvement. So, if you like this video, once again, please like it, share it with your friends, leave me comments about what you thought, you know. I like to hear from you, and I like feedback. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe to my channel, because it does help me out quite a bit. So that's all for now, and I will see you again next time.